Saint Nectarios, the great wonder-worker of modern times, was born Anastasius Cephalus in Celebria, Thrace, on October 1st, 1846. Since his family was poor, Anastasius was sent to Constantinople when he was 14 in order to find work. Although he had no money, he asked the captain of a boat to take him. The captain told him to take a walk and then come back. Anastasius understood and sadly walked away. The captain gave the order to start the engines, but nothing happened. After several unsuccessful attempts, he looked into the eyes of Anastasius, who stood on the dock. Taking pity on the boy, the captain told him to come aboard. Immediately, the engines started, and the boat began to move. Anastasius found a job with a tobacco merchant in Constantinople, who did not pay him very much. In his desire to share useful information with others, Anastasius wrote down short maxims from spiritual books on the paper bags and packages of the tobacco shop. The customers would read them out of curiosity and perhaps derive some benefit from them. The boy went about barefoot and in ragged clothing, but he trusted in God. Seeing that the merchant received many letters, Anastasius also wanted to write a letter. To whom could he write? Not to his parents, because there were no mail deliveries in his village. Not to his friends, because he had none. Therefore he decided to write to Christ, to tell him of his needs. "My little Christ," he wrote, "I do not have an apron or shoes. You send them to me. You know how much I love you." Anastasius sealed the letter and wrote on the outside, "To the Lord Jesus Christ in heaven." On his way to mail the letter, he ran into the man who owned a shop opposite the one in which he worked. The man asked him where he was going, and Anastasius whispered something in reply. Seeing the letter in his hand, the man offered to mail it for him, since he was on his way to the post office. The merchant put the letter in his pocket and assured Anastasius that he would mail it with his own letters. The boy returned to the tobacco shop filled with happiness. When he took the letter from his pocket to mail it, the merchant happened to notice the address. Astonished and curious, the man could not resist opening the letter to read it. Touched by the boy's simple faith, the merchant placed some money in an envelope and sent it to him anonymously. Anastasius was filled with joy, and he gave thanks to God. A few days later, seeing Anastasius dressed somewhat better than usual, his employer thought he had stolen money from him and began to beat him. Anastasius cried out, "I have never stolen anything. My little Christ sent me the money." Hearing the commotion, the other merchant came and took the tobacco seller aside and explained the situation to him. When he was still a young man, Anastasius made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. During the voyage, the ship was in danger of sinking in a storm. Anastasius looked at the raging sea and then at the captain. He went and stood beside the captain and took the helm, praying for God to save them. Then he took off the cross his grandmother had given him, containing a piece of the cross of Christ, and tied it to his belt. Leaning over the side, he dipped the cross into the water 3 times and commanded the sea, "Silence, be still." At once the winds died down and the sea became calm. Anastasius was saddened, however, because his cross had fallen into the sea and was lost. As the boat sailed on, sounds of knocking seemed to come from the hull below the waterline. When the ship docked, the young man got off and started to walk away. Suddenly the captain began shouting, "Cephalus, Cephalus, come back here!" The captain had ordered some men into a small boat to examine the hull in order to discover the source of the knocking, and they discovered the cross stuck to the hull. Anastasius was elated to receive his treasure, and always wore it from that time forward. There's a photograph taken many years later, showing the saint in his monastic clothing. The cross is clearly visible in the photo. On November 7, 1875, Anastasius received monastic tonsure at the Neomoni Monastery in Chios, and took the new name Lazarus. 2 years later, he was ordained a deacon. On that occasion, his name was changed to Nectarios. Later, when he was a priest, Father Nectarios left Chios and went to Egypt. There he was elected Metropolitan of Pentapolis. Some of his colleagues became jealous of him because of his great virtues, because of his inspiring sermons, and because of everything else which distinguished St. Nectarios from them. Other metropolitans and bishops of the Patriarchate of Alexandria became filled with malice towards the saint, so they told Patriarch Sophronius that Nectarios was plotting to become patriarch himself. They told the Patriarch that the Metropolitan of Pentapolis merely made an outward show of piety in order to win favor with the people. So the Patriarch and his synod removed St. Nectarios from his diocese. Patriarch Sophronius wrote an ambiguous letter of suspicion which provoked scandal and speculation about the true reason for the saint's removal from his position. St. Nectarios was not deposed from his rank, however. He was still allowed to function as a bishop. If anyone invited him to perform a wedding or a baptism, he could do so, as long as he obtained permission from the local bishop. St. Nectarios bore his trials with great patience, but those who loved him began to demand to know why he had been removed. Seeing that this was causing disturbance in the Church of Alexandria, he decided to go to Greece. He arrived in Athens to find that false rumors about him had already reached that city. His letter of suspension said only that he had been removed for reasons known to the Patriarchate, and so all the slanders about him were believed. Since the state and ecclesiastical authorities would not give him a position, the former metropolitan was left with no means of support and no place to live. Every day he went to the minister of religion asking for assistance. They soon tired of him and began to mistreat him. One day, as he was leaving the minister's office, St. Nectarios met a friend whom he had known in Egypt. Surprised to find the beloved bishop in such a condition, the man spoke to the minister of religion and education and asked that something be found for him. So St. Nectarios was appointed to be a humble preacher in the diocese of Bithynia and Euboea. The saint did not regard this as humiliating for him, even though a simple monk could have filled that position. He went to Euboea to preach in the churches, eagerly embracing his duties. Yet even here the rumors of scandal followed him. Sometimes, while he was preaching, people began to laugh and whisper. Therefore the blameless one resigned his position and returned to Athens. By then some people had begun to realize that the rumors were untrue, because they saw nothing in his life or conversation to suggest that he was guilty of anything. With their help and influence, St. Nectarios was appointed director of the Nectarios Seminary in Athens on March 8, 1894. He was to remain in that position until December of 1908. The saint celebrated the services in the seminary church, taught the students, and wrote several edifying and useful books. Since he was a quiet man, St. Nectarios did not care for the noise and bustle of Athens. He wanted to retire somewhere where he could pray. On the island of Aegina he found an abandoned monastery dedicated to the Holy Trinity, which he began to repair with his own hands. He gathered a community of nuns, appointing the blind nun Xenia as abbess, while he himself served as father confessor. Since he had a gift for spiritual direction, many people came to Aegina to confess to him. Eventually, the community grew to 30 nuns. He used to tell them, "I am building a lighthouse for you, and God shall put a light in it that will shine forth to the world. Many will see this light and come to Aegina." They did not understand that he was telling them that he himself would be that beacon, and that people would come there to venerate his holy relics. On September 20th, 1920, the nun Euphemia brought an old man in black robes who was obviously in pain to a hospital in Athens. This was a state hospital for the poor. The intern asked the nun for information about the patient. "Is he a monk?" he asked. "No, he is a bishop." The intern laughed and said, "Stop joking and tell me his name, mother, that I can enter it into the register." "He is indeed a bishop, my child. He is the most reverend metropolitan of Pentapolis." The intern muttered, "For the first time in my life I see a bishop without a panagia or cross, and, more significantly, without money." Then the nun showed the saint's credentials to the astonished intern, who then admitted him. For 2 months, St. Nectarios suffered from a disease of the bladder. At 10:30 on the evening of November 8, 1920, he surrendered his holy soul to God. He died in peace at the age of 74. In the bed next to St. Nectarios was a man who was paralyzed. As soon as the saint had breathed his last, the nurse and the nun who sat with him began to dress him in clean clothing to prepare him for burial at Aegina. They removed his sweater and placed it on the paralyzed man's bed. Immediately the paralytic got up from his bed, glorifying God. St. Nectarios was buried at the Holy Trinity Monastery on Aegina. Several years later, his grave was opened to remove his bones, as is the custom in Greece. His body was found whole and incorrupt, as if he had been buried that day. Word was sent to the Archbishop of Athens, who came to see the relics for himself. Archbishop Chrysostomos told the nuns to leave them out in the sun for a few days, then to rebury them so that they would decay. A month or two after this, they opened the grave again and found the saint incorrupt. Then the relics were placed in a marble sarcophagus. Several years later, the holy relics dissolved, leaving only the bones. The saint's head was placed in a bishop's mitre, and the top was opened to allow people to kiss the head. St. Nectarios was glorified by God, since his whole life was a continuous doxology to the Lord. Both during his life and after his death, St. Nectarios had performed thousands of miracles, especially for those suffering from cancer. There are more churches dedicated to St. Nectarios than any other modern Orthodox saint. St. Nectarios also composed hymns, and his most well-known is the Agni Parthene, or Hymn to the Virgin. It is the music that is being sung throughout this video.